Yes, Guyana to the world.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globespan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavor, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight, watching or listening from wherever you are. You are on Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noir Singh, with Devin Bassoon as our technical operator for tonight, as usual. Tonight, we're discussing Petrostate realities, standard of living, temporary work, emigration or immigration, or immigration or migration. Joining us for this discussion tonight, faces that Guyanese and the international community is quite familiar with. Mr. Colin Haynes, who appeared in this program before. He's the CEO and founder of Development Associates, a businessman. Mr. G.H.K. Lal, columnist, a very, very prolific writer in the press in Guyana and appearing quite often on this show as well. And Mr. Timothy Jonas, Senior Counsel and General Secretary, not Secretary General, General Secretary of ANUG, a new United Guyana political party. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. If we may begin, what is Petrostate? I haven't the faintest clue. What is Petrostate? So shall we ask the businessman, what is a Petrostate?
It's good to be here. It's good to be among friends again. I think when we're talking about Petrostate, we're talking about a state where it's new or ongoing oil producing nation. So Guyana now finds itself in a very unique and very fortunate environment. We're a petroleum, which is petro for short, petroleum producing nation. There are quite a number in the world, if you know, places like United States, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, our neighbor, has the most oil in terms of reserves, Iraq, Iran, and so forth. So I think that with that also presents great opportunities because, as you know, oil on the world market is called black gold because of its preciousness in terms of being able to fuel manufacturing, production, to be able to drive sustainable development. And the downside of it is back in times we've seen how that resource also could become a curse. That is the Dutch curse.
Okay, so our neighbor, besides Venezuela, Brazil is also a petrostate. In fact, produces several million barrels of oil daily, and Colombia is a petrostate as well, and so is Ecuador, and there are a few other countries on the continent that produces oil. And of course, we have Mexico up north on the border of the United States. So petrostate reality. So if you could define that a little more, Mr. G.H. Kellogg.
Good evening, everyone. Good to be here to share with you folks and to our listeners and viewers. Thank you, Mr. Singh and company, for making this possible and the invitation extended. Petrostate. Oil, the black blood of Allah, as the Arabs call it, is the dominant contributor by far to the economy. In addition to what Mr. Haynes said, it's all those things, and I would like to sneak in that the dominant contributor, the plank, the major plank in the national economy. Realities, we're talking about standard of living, and we can deal with the textbook definition, or we can talk about it in realities, real life, as experienced by the common man and woman and family in this country. Now, how do you want me to go straight into that now, Dr. Fitzroy?
Please, no problem. Go, please.
Good. Okay. So, standard of living. It's a quantitative thing from the books and the experts, based on driven by income, GDP, a word that most Guyanese are familiar with, even though they may not fully appreciate exactly all that it means. And what does it mean for how an individual or a community or a country as a whole exists? And I think that's where I'd like to go with this tonight. And we really should be on top of the world. The last per capita calculation of Guyana's GDP was $49,811 US. That's $10 million a man, woman, and child in this country. 10 million Guyana dollars. And excuse me for the rounding. I plan to do a lot of that tonight whenever I use numbers. So really, we're talking about $10 million per person. And I see in the bottom there, we're talking about temporary work, emigration, that's out, the exodus, and immigration coming in. Well, let's deal with this thing here. There's been some disagreement, and that's a mild word, locally, and I've been on the periphery of that, about what really is happening with our standard of living, the ordinary man. And that's driven by our cost of living, our cost of existence, daily existence. And the experts say, and the officials say, that from last December to mid-year, the increase in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is 1.6%. Now, that's an average of averages, baskets and transportation and medicine, and the all-important one, food. Food, gentlemen. Food, ladies and gentlemen who are listening. What's the cost of food like? Basic food, not imported food, not luxury food, luxury items. And that's where the trouble begins, because the reality in Guyana, and that has been borne out so brilliantly, so illuminatingly by Stabroek News for 93 weeks, up to last Monday. This Monday is week, the Monday of this week. We hear our people, 10 men and women, week after week saying, "I hurting, I can't make it, I feeling the squeeze, I dey bad, I falling back." Now, the experts say the CPI is 1.6% increase from December to this June. As I said, I think it's a wonderful number. I'm not going to challenge, or we're not going to get into the intricacies of how you got there. I'm going to take that as is for the purpose of this sharing here tonight, gentlemen. It is 1.6, so let's hold that there. But when you look at the basic items, we're talking about rice and flour and oil and cooking gas. I am not talking about sugar. Drink black tea. I ain't talking about, about salt. I am talking about rice and flour and oil to get a pot going to feed the family. And every week you're looking and you hear these people talking from Linden to Quarantine and Ishalton to Albion and in Georgetown in between, East Bank and East Coast and West Demerara. And they're saying Well, rice gone up, a bag of rice gone up by so much, from so to so. And when you're looking at it, you're hearing about 25%, 40%. And then you go to a small bottle of oil and a big bottle of oil, and you hear the same percentages, and you say, how are these people coping? And in a petrostate where the GDP, and now it's an average, an average has these hidden time bombs in them, says that we are $10 million ahead people per year based on our GDP. And that's the last calculation that I've seen. So something is not meshing here. Something is telling me that when these people are crying, and nobody can say there's any partisanship here. Nobody can say, well, you know, that is the man from the other side and that is the woman from this side or whatever. Things are bad with our people in this petrostate that is one of the most talked about in the world. And because our citizens are feeling pain. And I am particularly concerned that our folks in power seems to be inoculated. They seem to be immune to all this. They say, well, look how much we did. Look how much we did. And they have done some things. Make no mistake about it. Some things have been done, and more than a few things. But our people are still dragging and our people are still losing ground. And so this comes now to this business about temporary work and migration. And I think when we talk about migration, we're going to have to talk about B1 and B2 visas and the significance of those and the escalation of those in recent years. Can
we come back to that? Let's hear from.
I think I need to stop now and let the others come in.
Right. So Council, he has defined petrostate realities in terms of standard of living, and one can add to that how the petrol dollars are being spent. So would you like to add anything else to that? 2 points.
Well, I don't know if your viewers saw the difference in the definition that GHK gave and Colin. So let me admit to you, when our host gave me this topic, petrostate, I recognized I was kind of unclear on the definition myself, so I Googled it. So let me give you that bit of admission. And GHK, his definition accords with what the gurus say, that it's not simply you're producing oil, but you're dependent on it. So Saudi Arabia is a petrostate, but the US, which produces a huge amount of oil, is not a petrostate because its economy certainly, it doesn't even marginally depend on that produce. It's got so many other things going on. We have fast become a petrostate. It's the largest portion of our GDP. It's increasing all the time. It's certainly the largest, fastest growing part of our economy. So if we're not there yet, and I think we are there, we're going to be there very soon, dependent on oil, and therefore susceptible and vulnerable to the Dutch disease, which is there, which we are already seeing symptoms of. I also want to congratulate Stabroek News for the program they've been doing, that weekly program they've been carrying on the cost of living. There needs to be, and GHK has pointed it out, is if you just take the maths of how much revenue is being derived from oil and divided by population, is a huge amount of money. But of course, it's not possible just to treat it in that light. Society functions, and the object of our leaders should be to provide as far as they can, and now they've got the means to do it, facilities and infrastructure which are impeccable. So social services, medical services, education services, police and crime fighting services, social services in terms of subsidizing the people who cannot meet their daily needs, but also implementing systems that allow them to be gainfully employed, allow them to educate their children so that they break the generation curse. Find systemic ways to make the lives of Guyanese better. This needs improvement to our failing infrastructure. Our infrastructure has declined since the British left in the 1960s. It needs a lot of work to bring it back to a state where it serves the needs of the people. And that infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges, it's also hospitals and schools and that kind of thing. But the free money that we have gotten from oil and gas needs to be spent in a way that demonstrates fiscal responsibility. So I again agree with GHK that we are seeing things being built. And the apologists for the government find it very easy because the government is supposed to build a school. Well done. The government is supposed to build a road. Well done. But the flip side of that coin, the other end, when that pendulum swings, is that those are the very projects which are the main source of corruption and theft of money and lack of financial accountability. And if the award of contracts and the development of the infrastructure is to be done in a way which holistically serves Guyanese and improves our standard of living and hopefully allows our economy to develop independently of oil, it has got to be done prudently and transparently. We are not getting value for money. The projects are haphazard, slapdash, and while they need to be done, we're not seeing a methodology that is carefully planned, forward-thinking, and designed to help with an end result that is a holistic plan. We're not seeing that. We're seeing something that's too slapdash, and we're seeing a poor return. We pay $100 for a road, and we get a $40 road. And we are seeing people becoming inordinately wealthy, but we're not getting value for money. So there are two sides to the coin.
Colin, would you like to
Yeah.
add?
So the average Guyanese makes about $60,000 to $100,000, anyway, without that range, per month.
Mhm.
Right. Now the nominal GDP, which measures the overall performance of the economy, says it's around 25,000 US, $590. Well, I'm gonna use that figure as compared to the partisan party GDP, which says we're probably far over US at 80,137, and I'm all talking here in US dollars, right? So if you ever took that and you break that down by month, you're seeing that the average Guyanese makes anywhere about $447,000. I've talked to doctors, lawyers, I've talked to tradesmen. Nobody in the country makes that amount of money, right? And what that is doing, because of this influx of investment in Guyana, what we're seeing happening is it's inflating the GDP numbers, and it's inflating the prices of things as well. So the average Guyanese have now to live on $100,000 salary with a $400,000 lifestyle. And yes, the government has a lot much more money that they're spending. If you see the last budget is $1.1 trillion. A lot of it goes towards infrastructure projects, which makes it an ideal candidate to be corrupt, right? To steal, because money is not going directly into the pockets of people, right? Money is going to just a very small subset of the population, right? Whether you're friends or family with the government, you're fine. You know, you'll get a piece of that, right? But if not, that doesn't work. Now, the reality on the ground is this: 48% poverty level, 10% kids are going through wasting, which is extreme poverty. 20% of the population, a mother tonight has 3 kids somewhere in Bartica or in Aishalton or wherever in the country, don't have food to feed the kids. Kids are going to school hungry. These are the realities of a petrostate. We have the money, but then greedy politicians and incompetent leaders don't know how to actually make money or provide funds to the average person, this is what's happening. And so the real crux of this is people cannot eat roads, they cannot eat schools, they can't eat health centers, right? They can't eat an airport as well. What they need is they need to have programs that directly will funnel money for their survival and sustainability. And when we get to the point of talking about temporary jobs, I'm gonna do the analysis and show you. But one last thing that I wanted to mention is yes, um, we're talking about a 1.1 trillion dollars budget, and almost four
Much more.
hundred billion dollars is what did you say?
It's much more. There were two additional
Yeah.
budget, probably
Supplement,
about one
yes,
1.3
supplement.
billion or
Okay,
so.
sure.
It's
There's more than that, but the reality is, people are hungry. People need food, and what do we do? Do we build more roads? Is that the way to go? Do we build more schools? Is that the way to go? I mean, how are we gonna feed? How are we gonna feed our kids?
right. So half of the population probably will never see those roads, probably never drive on them. Probably
Correct.
those would never know what they look like.
Mhm.
Coming from these rural areas or even in some of the urban areas where we have extreme poverty. So it's sure we must have roads and bridges and so forth, but there has to be a balance. GHK,
Yes, there has to be that balance, The original budget, national budget of 1.146 trillion, 58% of that was towards infrastructure development. Who can argue with that? But then there's the dark side of that, which council pointed out to, and which I'll put in more patois. If you don't spend, you can't thief, right? So the more you spend is the more you could thief. And we have been hearing about that, and I don't have to talk about that. People who are devoted to the government has been forced to say that. Now we've got let's stick with this standard of living thing. We can hold off standard of living, this basket of components that go in there: transportation, medicine, education, utilities. And you can hold off on certain things. Maybe you can delay to get the medicine. Maybe you can delay going to town and the market unless it's school or work and you just have to find the money. But how long are you going to hold off on food? How long are you going to keep existing in a half-starved or half-filled condition in what is a petrostate? In a state that everybody's talking about, look, all this money is there and the population is so small, and these people must be living in heaven. These people they certainly have the underpinnings or the elements of what it takes to have an economic paradise. I think, look, without knocking the government, I appeal to the government to say, you know what we're talking about here. You're hearing about it. Your own analysis should tell you this, if it's honest and if it's forthright, that people, look, we've got to have a balance. The tilt is too much towards brick and boards. And we've got to get now and deal with bodies that are famished, families that are not making are scratching out an existence. Our people should not be forced to be at that state. Now, some people have said, look, it's $1 million a month and whatever else. I haven't fallen into that school or bought into that school. I see Dr. Terence Blackman, who we've shared time here with, came up with this thing about was it called a universal basic income? And I think it has its merits. Of course, it has its drawback. But it has its merits and is worth some consideration by the powers that be, and say, how do we fix the people on help? Give the people some help in a petrol state where all this money is sloshing around. gushing in and sloshing around, so that they can know what it is to be a citizen in a viable petrostate. So one is the balance, and two is the sharing, where I think less has to be towards infrastructure. 58%, what the number is, 40%, 45%, that's not going to kill us. That's not going to set us back 50 years. So I think that, and that money has to go towards the people, especially those who are really catching hell, as we say, or catching tail or something like that. You know, barrels have long been a staple of our reality. Now, another thing that has crept into the equation, and I am part of that, I've been part of that before we found oil, hampers. Certainly, it's not a hamper as big as a cow, but you know, it's a little hamper that I would do several times a year. But there are hampers now coming. People are coming in from outside and bringing in hundreds of hampers and going to different communities and share. A wonderful thing, a commendable thing. But in a petrostate, gents, fellow Guyanese, in a petrostate, we're talking about barrels and remittances. And I don't know what the most current number is on remittances. And now we've thrown in, adjacent to that, hampers. So in other words, you got this thing, you're going to put it on the fire and you're going to move along, and they're going to keep you going for a bit. Yeah, and this should not be the reality in a petrostate. This should not be the standard of living in a country that has got all these glorious numbers, you know, GDP and economic numbers and oil numbers and barrels found and lifted and all of this business. Where is the difference in that to the people in this country? And I think that's where things stop. That's where everything seizes up. And I think the government needs to address that. Of course, we are 1 year away from an elections, and I foresee a minimum of 2, if possibly 3, what do we want to call this? Cash incentives. And with, you know, remember who gave the thing, right? But that's not the way to do this thing. We'll take it and go from there. But I think some more thought has to go in there, and some more care, genuine care for our fellow citizens.
So Council, do you think we need a balance? And if so, how do we address a balance? I mean, how much do we put up for here, there, and everywhere?
Yeah, this has been occupying my time because the problem is not simple, and yet there's been no effort whatsoever to broach the issues. Our society is disparate. You can't give a single description that will encapsulate all of us. The people in the urban areas often are the poorest because, as has been pointed out, they're working for a salary, a small salary. They depend on that salary to buy whatever they can buy to look after their families. The people on the fringes and the outskirts of the urban areas, they might have some chickens and get eggs. They got a fishing net, they can catch fish. You'd be surprised how high fish ranks in the diet of Guyanese out of town, because fish is free. We got creeks, we got rivers, we got trenches, we got dams, we got cocos all around the place. Fish is free. And even in town, when you go to those areas where you see people complaining government have come to tear them down and that kind of thing, they live near a dam and they fish. And a lot of children catch fish after school, and that's how the family get by. So as a source of protein, fish is important, but the point I'm trying to make is that depending on where in Guyana you live, if you just go a few miles out, there are people who don't have electricity. The electricity grid doesn't reach them. But in town, a large part of your salary has to be allocated for electricity because you're dependent on it to preserve the same food that in the country areas you can go and pick a couple plantain and fish, and you're not as dependent, and they don't have refrigeration, so they learn to live without it. So the needs are very different. In the Amerindian communities in the interior, the needs are very different. What's happening with us, and I think what has brought our poverty, the poverty of the majority of our people in their faces, made them confront it, is with the availability of social media and television. A lot of folks are seeing how others are living. Poverty is a relative thing. If you're barefoot and your neighbor's barefoot, you're not poor. But if you're barefoot and your neighbor is wearing shoes, you're suddenly poor. It's relative. It's how you compare with what you're seeing around you. How do we sort that out? How do we deal with that? The fact is, on a short-term basis, we have got to find a way to get immediate relief to the people who need it the most. I want to say that again, immediate relief to the people who need it the most. The other thing we have to do is we have to find a way at the other end of the spectrum, the people who we know are making money, to bring them into the net so that they are contributing to NIS and PAYE. You see, it's not just about free oil money. The people who are the wealthier in our country, those same contractors who are earning big dollars, they are not remitting their fair share. They are not doing their duty as social citizens to pay what they're supposed to pay as taxes. So we got to find a way to bring the big boys in. And we have to, as a short term, that's the midterm. As a short term, we have to provide immediate relief to the people who need it the most. The people who need it the most are the mothers with children. They are the most vulnerable and the most dependent. And I'm satisfied about that. Whether you're talking about the mother in town who has to go and work in a shopping region street and leaves her child with grandma or leaves her child with auntie to go and do that and earns a salary and comes back to make ends meet, or the mother in the countryside whose child helps her in the garden, whose child helps pull in meadow and sends the child to school and fishes, or the mother in the Amerindian community. Our mothers are our most vulnerable. And because they are the ones in our matriarchal society who are usually left looking after the children, especially where the family unit is not intact, single mothers, mothers whose men have disappeared, they are the ones who need to be helped the most. Now, the government boasts, because they care, that they gave $40,000 to school children. And they said that accounted for $9 billion. For me, that scratches the surface. There are two things I would like to suggest immediately for the people who need it the most. First of all, every mother should get from NIS, in respect of each child that she has, a monthly sum of money once that child is registered at a school and is attending school. And that should come from NIS. That shouldn't come from anywhere else. So if for the next 5 years, NIS has to be subsidized to meet that, that needs to be done from gas and oil money so that there is an immediate relief to every mother in Guyana in respect of her children. I would recommend a larger sum for the first child and lesser sums for second, third, fourth children. Now, that money needs to be allocated this way. And they've done it in India with success. You open a bank account for each child born in Guyana, and the money is put into the bank account, and the mother has authority to withdraw a portion of that money. So the end result is that the mother has an access to immediate money every month. She's no longer dependent on a possibly abusive husband. She now has the wherewithal to work and to get that extra money and can do more with it. She has autonomy financially. She has dignity. And when the child reaches an age of 16 or 17, there is a sum of money in a bank account that is accessible. It also ingrains in us a culture of using the banking system, because a big part of our problem and a big part of the vulnerability of those same people is they're so cash-based. Money is put in a jar somewhere, or money is hidden somewhere. Accessibility and familiarity with the banking system is necessary to survive in today's society. So begin to inculcate that in our children from now. So that's the first thing I would recommend. The second thing is that encouragement could be had for those same mothers and their children that daddy, whose name is on the birth certificate, is then brought in to ask, where are you working? Are you paying NIS? Are you paying your PAYE? So you start trying to bring Guyanese in who can afford it, because all Guyanese need to be in the radar. All Guyanese need to be in the system so that you can start separating them to see who needs help, who needs housing, who needs employment benefits, who needs invalidity benefits, sick benefits, maternity benefits, but also who is skiving and not paying and needs to be contributing. The next thing I would do, because what I've just suggested is going to triple that $9 billion, $40,000 they want to pay. It's going to triple it and quadruple it. But to help buffer that, we got free oil and gas money, yes. I would like to recommend that instead of 55, the age of retirement and coming off of the NIS grid needs to extend, possibly to 62, with an option for a second period of 5 years, voluntary if you want to stay employed, so that you have an option to work until 67, with the incentive that you get a higher pension when you're done. We inherited a system from the British that worked in the 60s, when your life expectancy was late 60s, maybe 70. 70 was a long life. People living in the 80s now. And unlike the British, unlike the Americans, unlike the Canadians, we haven't adapted. So our system still has that you stop paying NIS at 55. Now, is 55 the end of your working life now? Is that realistic now? I raised that because I turned 52 this month. So tell me if you expect me to retire in 3 years. Those days are finished, and it's time for us to adjust our needs and our income for NIS. To meet that, I should be paying NIS for at least another 10 years. And I should have the option to say to NIS, man, give me a higher pension when I do retire. I'm taking a voluntary 5 years more, willing to pay you till I'm 67. That will bring more money into the coffers of NIS. When the fathers whose children are benefiting from these bank accounts are brought in to pay NIS, that will increase the coffers of NIS. And when the children begin to benefit because we're giving them better education, better health, better social services, so they become employed and business people who then can contribute back into the system, we have a medium-term solution. But my short-term solution is that oil money needs to be spent triple, quadruple what is now going because we care. And please, let's stop giving white envelopes to fishermen and Gaisuko ex-employees and the kind of nonsense that was being done with accounting disaster. All of that should be in the NIS, and there should be a system, a structure to give immediate aid to the people who need it the most, and at the other end, find a way to bring those people who should be contributing into the system.
Yeah, I think those are brilliant, workable recommendations. If we may switch now to talk a little about temporary work leave, the $40,000, is it 20 hours a month? 10 hours a month. 10 hours a month. Okay. How
10 days.
How can,
10 days.
10 days. 10 days. Right. 10 days. Sorry. How do we address this problem? Certainly, temporary $40,000, it can't take you anywhere. It could barely buy you a week's ration, if it could. Colin?
Yeah. So I want to say, just to add to what Tim and JHK was talking about, I think that we have to find creative ways, right? I think that every child, when they're born in Guyana, we have more land in Guyana than people can occupy it. Why don't we have an incentive program that when a child is born, they get an acre land somewhere, right? It doesn't matter if it's somewhere out in
we don't have that much. We got a lot of land.
We do.
But
we
go
do.
ahead.
Studies have shown by I've spoken to a leading geologist in Guyana. We're a nation of 800,000, Vishnu, 800,000 people, and we've got 83,000 square miles, right? And they're saying, minus the rocks and everything, the lands that are not arable, there is enough land for every Guyanese to have at least an acre of land. We're giving acres away to the Chinese. We're giving acres away to foreign companies and all sorts of stuff. Why don't we give it to us? So, for instance, you have a son is born, you have an acre of land somewhere. You can't sell it until a certain age, or you have to develop it starting at a certain age, right? I've been the voice crying out in the wilderness. Tim would agree with this. As a matter of fact, Tim and I, when I had a discussion, this idea came up, and I'm just giving an arbitrary number, but I'm saying if you put $200 million aside, which we're getting 50 million US dollars a day in oil revenue, if you put 200 million, that's about 15 or 12 days, and you say for the year I'm gonna pay the public servants extra. So on top of what you're getting, at that amount of money, 200 million US dollars, it's $80,000, $90,000 more a month. So if you were making 100,000, if you were a teacher making a training teacher make 90,000, you're now making 180. You raise the income tax threshold to 100,000 because you have to address the realities. JHK, you were talking about a consumer price index. I myself have done some work on this because I go to the market and I buy eggs. Eggs before the pandemic was 2019 was $800 a crate. Eggs now is $1,600. The pandemic is gone. I mean, gas prices has gone down as well too. What happened? I mean, they're saying we have a shortage of eggs in Guyana. I don't believe so, because we can readily go and find eggs everywhere. Everywhere on the market, you can go to Guyana Marketing Corporation and get that price, get that same $800,000 or $900,000. So Guyana is now a country where there's runaway hyperinflation. You've got high price index. I mean, the United States, the biggest economy in the world, is 7%. Guyana price index, if you look at just eggs alone, it's 20% for not an emerging economy, by the way, for a frontier economy, because we don't have any infrastructure in place for emerging economy. So I believe that there are certain things that we could do, raising people's salary, cash transfers, we have to address that too. It's the people's resource. If we don't give it to them, then what are we doing? We're giving it to the politicians' pockets. I mean, it's not. This can't be sustainable. Let's find ways of reducing taxes. Let's find ways of giving to social programs that directly impact the people. Now, talking about the sustainable, the temporary work conundrum. 10 days, $40,000 a month, right? That is at the poverty line, because the poverty line is $1,333 a day, and the poverty line is $1,300. So the government in a petrostate is putting us back on the poverty line. You're just saying that, okay, someone has a job, where they're collecting some money, but it's not sustainable. What we need to have in Guyana is technical and vocational training. There's projected that there's going to be a construction boom by 2030, and Guyana will not be able to meet the construction boom. These are the areas that we have to start as a nation to empower the people, right? I'm doing a construction project. You bring some people to do construction, because a man, throws a shovel around as a laborer, in 5 or 10 years, he thinks that he's skilled. No, that's not being skilled. You can't read a plan. You don't know the design and the layouts of construction. You don't understand that with the changing climate change and changing environment, you can build houses to be able to mitigate these shocks. These are things that builders, architects, and skilled people are doing all around the world. So this thing where the government is giving people a freck, right? A side piece, right? I mean, how long this $40,000 is gonna last? Before 10 days, I could tell you that money is done. Sometimes before a day, it's done. And they're putting $10 billion every single year for the last maybe 2 or 3 years. Let's say about $25 billion. Let's spend those $25 billion on creating sustainable jobs, of improving our energy grid, improving our ability to do manufacturing, agriculture, increase education for science and technology so that we can present more innovators. One of the things I'm looking around, we don't have a lot of innovators in Guyana. Where's the next best inventor coming out of our country? Where are they, right? Who is coming up with an idea? I mean, is there the infrastructure to present these ideas so that they can be able to thrive in an environment where they could be able to come up with ideas, to pitch them, to get angel investment funding and that kind of stuff? This is what real and sustainable development looks like, not a $40,000 side piece.
GHK, you were beginning to talk about that. I mean, you have anything else to add to it? I mean, makeshift, make believe jobs are not taking us anywhere. You're basically wasting $40,000 when you could create more long term, real, productive jobs, long term sustainability.
Before I go there, I just want to commend Council and Mr. Haynes, the NIS idea and the components of it, it certainly has a lot of merit to it. And I like that piece about the land. And I think I'd like to say our tax structure needs to be revisited. I'm going to hold off on words like overhaul and so on. It needs to be revisited with a view to serious enhancement. So, okay, let's go now to temporary work. I want to look at this from two perspectives, folks. One, the local perspective, and two, which is going to fit into the migration, the emigration parts. 10 days, 40,000 numbers, 1,333. That's eerily a day when you divide by 30. $1,333 per day. That sounds eerily close. Was that the World Bank, $5.50 US? That's
Yes.
$1,100 a day. So here we are, 1,300 with 200, a little cushion of $200. We look at our minimum wage, and this is not temporary work. Our minimum wage, which is $74,400, and we're talking about $2,400. We look at our minimum wage in the public service, which is somewhere, I'm trying to wrap my arms around this, somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000. And our people, given the realities of cost of food, are fighting a losing battle there with those numbers. $1,333 a day, $550 US, $74,000 minimum wage. Look, makeshift job, temporary job, maybe it's better than nothing, but I think we've got to be done. We've got to get away from this thing about short-term gimmicks, about things that add to the numbers and the statistics. Look, we have created 10,000 new jobs. That's mighty impressive, folks. But where's the substance to this thing? That is why. So it doesn't keep anybody going. It does not dignify our labor force to have them on the roadside in the village areas, picking up. It's better than nothing, and they'll take that. But it's also something that you can hold people to hostage to. I'm trying to steer away from the political aspect about it and just deal with the reality of it. But here it is, we are degrading our labor, and we are not setting them up for a long-term situation. I have heard about goal. I have my ideas about goal, which are better not stated here, and so on and so forth. But I'll say this, I want to go to this temporary work. And based on the numbers I've given you, the World Bank, $5.50, $40,000 for 10 days, minimum wage of $74,000. Look at this, folks. B1, B2 visas. I got a little bit of a shock today, and I don't get shocked. I could hold an electric wire, and I don't get shocked. Don't put that in the papers, all right? Now, in 2021, 1,600 visas, B1 visas, according to the US State Department, were issued, B1/B2. In 2022, 6,500 plus. And this is where now a mountain fell on me. In 2023, and I looked at this thing 10 times, and I went and cross-checked. In 2023, 23,651 B1, B2 visas were issued by the United States Consulate in Georgetown, Guyana.
Wow.
The 6-month one. Take your stamp at Kennedy and you're gone. Here are the numbers. The New York State minimum wage increased from $15 to $16 a day, an hour, sorry. Dr. Bisram, you are there. Can correct me as I go along. That's 128 US dollars a day using an 8-hour day. We'll make that $100 a day, right? $100 a day. Times 6 days, that's 600. Times 4 weeks, that's 2,400. Times 5 months, and I'll tell you why 5 months. You got to get back to Guyana before the 6 months expire, right? And you show the people a little cushion. So you've got 12,200 US dollars. Your plane ticket is $1,500 economy, give or take. You send 2 barrels, you fill them up, that's 25, that's 1,000, that's 2,500. You pay 500 to ship them, that's 3,000. You fill up 2 suitcases, that's 1,000, that's 4,000. You pay the people who you stay in their basement 2,000, it's family, so 6. And you've got $1 million, 6,200 US dollars for 5 months of work. And you're telling me about $40,000 a month and $74,000 and $90,000. Get out of here, folks. The math is there. We don't need to be Dr. Terence Blackman, God bless him. A mathematician, we can just work this. That is why 23,000, a lot of them might be people who don't go and work five months and then run back here and then go next year and do. But I have people who work in my yard and who have gone to the United States, catch their hand and come back here and throw back for the rest of the year. Now, we're talking about $16 an hour. I am not talking about the welder who did my gate. I'm not talking about the construction people and them in $15, $16 hour people. And they have been part of this thing. So temporary worker, immigration, we've got people going and hustle for work in the Big Apple, for loading a truck and the winter come on and I got to abandon his left ear and sometimes he don't come back Christmas time and he got out there in the freezing thing and he hustling and he catching the hand. Why are our people pushed to these extremes? Because we have the numbers we were talking about, 40,000, 74,400, etc., etc. Look at pension. $36,000 a month. And the government said, hey, listen, we've increased it in the last 3 years and we've done better than the other guys. Good. Here's this, $36,000. 76,000 pensioners, including people like me. You throw in, there's an overlap here. People who qualify for the same NIS that Mr. Jonas was talking about. You've got 27,000 of them have done, some of them have gone to different levels, but we are using the minimum. From 35, they've gone to $43,000. So 43 plus 36, that's their business. Minus 76,000 old age pensioners, take away 27,000 NIS pensioners from that, and you got 49,000 people whose only income may be $36,000 a month. You look, so you've got that grouping there. You've got the teachers and their numbers that finally came down the pike, and we're going to be talking about that for a while to come. 10% now and 8 next year and 9 and whatever. I see the Boeing workers walked off for 25%. The Boeing workers said that we are not going to endorse this thing. We want 40%. right? And I don't think they had anything they gave up like the teachers did. So we're asking our people in a time of plenty to, hey, this is what we can afford. We've got to keep our eye on the inflation ball, and you're going to have to manage with this somehow. Again, temporary work. Again, teachers and public servants and minimum wage workers in the private sector. And so we have people who are looking to catch a plane, collect what they could collect, draw down and come back here, and still come out way ahead of if they were here. That's part of our reality, part of our standard of living that forces our people, because of the policies that we have cemented and from which we don't seem to be willing to move, to hear, to be responsive to the cries of our people and to the real pain, that they are feeling there. And I think this should not be in a country as where Guyana is today, given this patrimony that it has and given what's coming in. Yeah, we can talk about renegotiation and all that kind of business, but that's not the thing here. What we've been getting, what do we need to do to make that pie that's coming to us right now, be divvied up in a manner that every citizen feel, or the citizens that need it the most, those that are in most need, they have a grasp of a little bit of that.
The numbers you mentioned are the bare minimum.
Yes.
When they come here, they work anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and they work 6, sometimes even 7 days a week. So the amount of money they accumulate is probably twice or thrice the amount you mentioned.
Yes, sir.
So they really catch the hand, to use the Guyanese colloquial term.
Mm-hmm.
Council.
I think one of the central acts of dishonesty that I've seen is the reckless promise that was made to provide, how many thousand jobs was it?
50.
An impossible number of jobs. And then the barefaced assertion that the promise had been realized. Here's the thing. In a country of 750,000 people, so 300,000 adults, 350,000 adults, 1,000 adults. For you to be talking about 50,000 jobs is enormous. It's mind-boggling in terms of the proportion to the population. And for you to pretend that you have conjured those jobs out of thin air. Mm-hmm. You see, in any respectable organization, you hire somebody to do a job and you see a need. So your floor dirty, you hire a sweeper. Your human resources, your hiring and firing is difficult, you need a human resources officer. You're not coordinating your team well, you need a manager. So you hire people to meet needs. Is it that our systems were so poor that we had a need for 50,000 people? Or is it that we are giving free money to one set of people that we don't need, and therefore consolidating and concretizing the control by government and the monopoly by government, its control of money, of the purse strings, by more white envelopes being given out as cash? Here you are, you're pretending you have a job, you're pretending to work, and here's your money, and it's a minimum wage. So we are guaranteeing you poverty, but you still got to say thank you very much and smile and shake my hand and treat me like a deity because you're getting this free money from me. It's a travesty. We don't recognize our own oppression anymore. And that is something that really fundamentally bothers me.
Right.
Where did those jobs come from? And how do our leaders, with their free oil money and their free handouts, want to talk about creating these jobs? You create a job when you create an environment for business to grow. And when businesses grow, there's an increased need for labor. There's an increased need for employees, and that's how jobs are created. If you write a list and put 50,000 names on the list and put $40,000 next to each name, you haven't created jobs. You've created welfare. But you haven't even done it through a systemic way like the NIS, the National Insurance, which is how it should be done. You've done it in a way that allows your own mid-level political apologists who are implementing your ad hoc strategies to use favoritism. So you hear in the villages that this person get the job, that person didn't get the job, this person getting the fortune, that person not getting it because of loyalties. So you make your corruption even more endemic, even more within the system, even more established. It's a tragedy and it's a travesty, and it could not happen if an independent parliament was regulating the purse strings. It would not happen. And it could not happen if the balance in that parliament was observing where it is going and demanding accountability and demanding that there be an audit. It wouldn't happen. It also wouldn't happen where at the level where you're pretending these jobs exist, the people had the courage to say, well, what job is being done there by this person who's pretending to work, coming to work a couple of days every week? That's not how a country should be run. But yet that's what we're doing. Now, GHK, you said a thing. So to go back to my point, Doc, I really believe that the National Insurance Scheme is created to help people who are unemployed, who are underemployed, who are sick, who are pregnant, to provide benefits. And that is how it should be done. It should be done through the NIS as a system, so everybody knows who they are and when they're entitled, in what circumstances they're entitled. Even housing should be provided through the NIS. So everybody applies and you know what the rules are. Right now, nobody knows the rule. There's only one rule. Kowtow, keep your head low, smile, be friendly, and swear allegiance. And you'll get the contract, you'll get the 40,000, depending on what level you're at. Defend the indefensible, show your support, and you will get some crumbs. That's how our country is running. GHK, you talked about the figures of visas from Guyana. I thought that was interesting, and this may be a different topic, but I want to throw something out, food for thought. The Americans, according to their figures that they publish, issue about 1 million green cards every year. Green cards are talking about, not just the temporary. And legal immigrants, they have about 2.5 to 2.75 million a year. Legal immigrants. Now, in light of that, Guyana's a drop in the ocean, we respect. And the figures you're calling there were repeated, I believe, before 2015.
They were?
There were a lot of visas being issued before 2015.
Yes.
And there was a clear preference in the visas being issued.
That's true as well.
I think that the Americans can very easily manipulate our elections the way they want, just by procuring the absence of one kind of people or the other kind of people. What's laughable with us is they don't even have to ask you how they voted. They just got to ask you your name.
Yeah.
So Mr. Lal, Mr. Bizram will get their visas, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah.
And poor Jonas and Haynes might have a tougher time.
Yeah.
And chances are they get the end result they want. I'm wondering about that because I am very aware that they have been talking up shared governance. They have not been getting it from either side. And I'm hoping that we can do it ourselves, and I'm hoping we don't need that foreign influence as a push. But I really do think that Guyana on its own, Guyanese on their own, are at that stage where enough of them have decided that they can do that change. They can make that change for shared governance.
I don't see the evidence, but I hope it does. Gentlemen, let's summarize, close off. Colin, any final words, thoughts?
Yeah, I want to say that whether we call it revise, revamp, or whatever the tax system, because I don't want to be too overly political, I've always said that I need to talk straight to the people of Guyana because, when you're talking to a mother with 3 kids, she want to hear about the politics, right? She want to hear how I can get food on my table tonight. So we have a tax system that whether you're rich or you're poor, you're paying the
Mhm.
same level of taxation. This can't be. Somebody's got 5 kids and somebody got no kids, right? They're paying the same amount of PAYE taxes. I mean,
No,
I
no, I don't think that is correct because after a certain level, you don't pay any taxes.
what do you mean up to a certain level you don't pay taxes?
I don't know the numbers, but
So so so,
up to a minimum threshold,
so
the worker doesn't pay.
the PAYE tax, which is the 30%. Is it, Tim? Is it around 30%?
Yes, but as Doc is saying, there's a minimum that you don't pay tax. So you only pay tax over a certain amount. And
Right.
then
So
and
so
then
if
there's a third
so if
tier
we
that
have
if you earn even more than that, you pay a higher rate of tax. So there are 3 tiers.
Right, but what I'm saying is the number, right? So if you are, let's just say you're making over that amount of money. So let's say if the minimum tax threshold is 70,000, someone who's making $100,000 with 5 kids, someone who's making $100,000 with no kids,
Yes, I
they're
mean it's a valid point, but
they're paying
but
thirty
when you do
percent.
your
They're paying 30%. They're paying just as if they're single, right?
yes,
So what I'm saying is, you have to have a graduated rate. You can't say that a person who is single, right, should be um, get the subjected to the same rigors of the tax system that a person who is,
yes, okay.
who's making who have more kids. So I also wanted to say that I know we didn't get to cover immigration, which is an interesting thing. So um, I've looked and I've seen that Guyana, we suffer from what's called net immigration, not net migration, because net migration would also mean that we're getting a substantial people coming into the country than leaving. In 2001, it was negative 6.89, so that said somewhere, around 5,000 or something like that. It was negative 6.571 in 22, and 23 is negative 6.283. The diaspora who are leaving Guyana,
Also,
as you
people are
know,
still migrating. Yes,
yeah,
people are still
50% of them are going to
migrating.
the US, 21% to Canada, 6.4% to the UK, and Latin America and the Caribbean account for about 20%. Now, GHK, you also talked about remittances, right? Back in 2005, about 25% of remittances was covering our GDP. That meant if you took away remittances from Guyana almost 10 or 15 years ago, the country would collapse. But today, because we have oil, that has now gone down to 3%. And the number is also higher. It's $548.84 million. But even though the remittances is coming in, and this is something I always, tell people in Guyana, is yes, we're getting more remittances, but is our life getting a lot better? Is the barrel in the box, is that making a
Still
difference?
there.
Yes, I'm sure John Finance and Monishwars and so forth, they're making more money. But is this sustainable enough? And based on the discussions we're having, it is not. So today, the task is before government. And when I say government, I don't mean the guy who sits in the chair as a president or so forth, but government as a whole, whether it's local government, you've got situations where local government now, arms, they don't know that they can raise money. The 2801, the law says that local entities can raise their own money. But sometimes when they try to do that, they get pushback from central government. So we've got to really, um, you know, have an overall in the system of infrastructure of governance in Guyana. I think that's what it comes back to, because we can have all these fancy discussions, but my understanding is when we look at Guyana, real change happens when governments realize by way of the people, and they make those changes. And as Tim was saying, we find ourselves in a sad situation where we almost seems like we're enslaved to this kind of living. And I think we have to change it. And I think behavior is one of the biggest part of this. You know, we as a nation have to see ourselves better. We have to see ourselves better than politicians throwing bones at us, you know, giving us the crumbs. And we have to demand more. Because after all, we put them in those seats that they sit, whether it's in the National Assembly or is the executive arm.
We don't hold them accountable.
No.
On immigration, those with a 6 month visa, a significant percentage of them don't return. They're gone and they get lost in the Big Apple or wherever else. They are not returning to Guyana because they find Guyana hopeless. There's no reason to come back. They enjoy a better life in the United States. They're among friends, family, and as you indicated, the basement life is still better than what they enjoy in Guyana.
Eat nice food and make good money.
Yes, GHK.
You know, Petrostate reality, standard of living. In addition to that number, that staggering number I gave about B1, B2 visas, the so-called holiday tourist visa, every year we've been losing about 5,000 people to permanent residents.
More than that, but go ahead.
More than that, yeah. On the you know, I'm using, again, I like to use the minimum numbers. It's 5,000. It could be, it's more than that. So 5,000 from the State Department. It's over that. So when you multiply that, let's look at the last several years. You're talking, in addition to those who don't come back, you're looking at 20,000 people there. We're looking at, we didn't talk about people coming in, which skilled labor is obtained cheaper. And what are the ramifications of that for the Guyanese worker in a thriving economy? Look, our reality is that we have some numbers that are out of this world. And we have some people that are out of food. And we are not talking about 5% of our population or 15%. We have numbers that will blow your mind. And we have people, so many in our population, that are really dragging to make ends meet. They are scratching out, they're eking out an existence. And this is what should not be. We have heard some solutions offered. We've heard some, I think we've got a lot of viability about them. And I just hope that our policymakers would listen and don't look upon everybody as an enemy. We want, and we genuinely want, and I think I can speak for this group and the groups that I'm not a participant in. We want what is right and better and good and refreshing for our people. Look, I think that the four of us here can afford, we can have the luxury of contributing. Thank God for that, whether we believe on God or not. And but there are those who just can't keep their head above water. And as a leader, as a government, as an elected agent of the people, an elected servant of the people, that has to be concerning to me. The people who are hurting are not an abstraction. Gentlemen, they are not an abstraction. They are not a cipher. They are not a statistic on a spreadsheet. They are flesh and blood people, and they are hungry and they are hurting. And I think that should not be the reality or the standard of living in a petrostate.
Right.
Yeah, great point. Tim, you want to close it off for us?
There's a gap between the pretty speeches we hear from our politicians, the promises and the grand ribbon cutting and all of that, and what is the reality that is less visible but is very real for the day-to-day hard existence of most Guyanese. The thing is that the solutions aren't sexy, they're not easy. And both of those adjectives create problems because our leaders like sexy solution that they stand up and they look good and they can point to a bridge or they can point to a road, something that looks good to say, look what we did. And they also like the easy solution. So they go throwing all this free money around without really thinking about it. But the fact is that if we're to find a meaningful solution to the real and immediate crisis that is here, it has got to be done in a way that immediately gets money to those who need it the most. And it's not just the money. Our education system needs to become more holistic so that meals are provided in the schools, especially in the rural areas, sports, music. The children need to be cared for comprehensively while they are in school. They need to be entrusted into the care of teachers that you can close your eyes and know they'll be well looked after by people who have your ethics, your standards, your aspirations for the children.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get those people by paying them $8 to $9 to $100,000 a month. So if you're going to spend billions, as we have seen, spend billions to get $1 million buildings, well, all right, the corruption is there, but at least spend some of those millions to improve and the salaries that teachers are getting, improve the salaries that police and nurses are getting, so that the education care and the medical care is where we need it to be so that our children are taken care of and our mothers are empowered, given financial autonomy to work, knowing that their children are cared for and incentivized to keep their children in school. So they're not taken out early to sell on a corner or to beg or to go and farm in the
Or fish.
half acre. They're kept in school so that their futures are more plausible. And the reason I raise education, you haven't hit on it, you haven't touched on it because it's not directly relevant here. I have come across so many 9 and 10-year-olds in the school system in Guyana who cannot read, who cannot do addition and subtraction, let alone multiplication and division, at 9 and 10 years old in our public school system. Now, if we are failing them, it's already too late for them because nothing is going to be done for them between now and the next 6 years when they're 16, ready to come out into the world. We are failing our children because at home, the parents don't have the wherewithal to look after them properly, even if they're disposed to do that, even if they can break the generation curse because they've inherited that. At school, they don't get any reprieve because we are not paying our teachers and therefore we're not getting competent teachers. We're not providing the facilities in the schools to care for them. And we are creating another generation of laborers, of criminals, of people who are not equipped to deal in our wonderful Petrostate. In the meantime, the few and the favored are getting the contracts. And we're building lovely schools and hospitals all over the place. Nothing inside though. We have a crisis and we have to deal with it. But the solution is one that requires administrative competence. And I don't even see the will, let alone the competence at this stage.
Well said. Well, gentlemen, that'll be the final word for tonight until we meet again next time. Good night, all.
Good night, sir. Thank you very much.
Good night, guys.